Hello everyone, good morning. On behalf of Read Exhibitions, I would like to welcome you all to the third day of India Warehousing Show Digital Week. I would also like to thank all speakers for taking out time today to share their insights. Now we have a very interesting and a very important topic of today's webinar, the pandemic and the pharmaceutical world. The changing face of pharma supply chain, reinforcing the need for a crisis response strategy. I'm pleased to introduce the moderator of our session, Rahul Agarwal, MD, Kool. Running a healthcare-focused, technology-driven pharma supply chain company with a national presence. He's associated with the healthcare industry for 23 years and creating India's largest GWP, GDP compliant pharma warehousing infra, along with partnership in passive cooling solutions, blockchain for pharma, and secondary distribution. Is towards creating a healthcare distribution platform. Recorded version of webinar will be available on the platform. Now, without a further ado, I would like to return the time over to our moderator, Mr. Agarwal. Rahul, to you.
Yeah, thank you, Aditi. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. We have a very distinguished panel today, veterans from the field of pharma supply chain and pharma infrastructure. I would like to introduce the panelists. We have Dr. Ravi Prakash Mathur, who heads the supply chain in Dr. Reddy's. I mean, a very well-known person, no introduction needed. We've got Mr. Rajesh Kaushik from Sentient Pharma. He's the Associate Director, Procurement and Supply Chain, Asia Pac. We've got Mr. Vikram Srivastava, Head of Planning, Global Supply Chain, Sun Pharma. We've got Mr. Gaurav Bhatia, Supply Chain, GM Supply Chain from Reliance Retail Pharma. And we've got Mr. Mehul Shah, CEO Logos, which is one of the leading grade A warehousing companies in the world. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to start with the first question. As you're aware that, we were hit by the first wave of the pandemic somewhere around February, March 20. And, towards the end of the year, as things started improving and we expected things to go back to normal, we were again hit by the second wave and this caught everyone off guard. Whatever disruption had happened in the earlier wave, was augmented by the second wave, which was much more fierce and worse. And it's taken us some time to get back on track. And, once again, there are, discussions happening around the third wave, which is expected. Some say it's already there, some say it's going to happen. But there are views that it may not happen at all because of the, entire vaccination drive that is going on. And we, yet need to see what will happen, in the coming times. So a general question to all the panelists is, what do you feel about the preparedness on the pandemic third wave, and how do we come out of this? Mathur sir, would you like to give some views?
Yeah, so, my view on this thing is like the wave that we are seeing of the cases, and like every morning, normally what we do is the first search that we do on Google is what were the cases yesterday, right? And when we do that search, what comes out is a graph, like the wave, the first wave and the second wave. Now, as a supply chain person, you normally look at it as not as a wave of cases. You see that is also for the pharmaceutical industry a wave of demand. So there's every time there are cases, all the things that are related to rising cases, there will be a spike in demand with that. Now, why this is a concern is that, like in any wave in supply chain, there's this bullwhip effect. Okay. And every time there is a spike in demand and then a decrease in demand, this entire demand signal actually goes all the way back, for everything. So let's say, if you talk about the pharmaceutical industry per se, so it will be for formulations and APIs, the raw material, excipients. So it's very difficult, and especially when you see in the second wave, the slope was very sharp. So that means that you got to scale up whatever you are doing to that rate. So to have a rapid response is something that everybody will have to build as a strategy to be able to scale up fast, and then when required to scale down fast. So that will be the challenge. I think I'll leave leave with that comment for now and wait for the other panelists also.
Thank you, sir. Mehul, would you like to say something from your experiences? I mean,
I think,
you've seen 2 years of pandemic, and you all are in the warehouse business.
yeah.
I'm sure you would have seen a lot of disruption.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from the pre to post pandemic, I mean, one thing I would comment is the whether it's a first wave. First wave was a learning experience. Second wave was little, it come in a very shortest possible time. But I think every one of us as Indians or as a industry also as a player, everyone's prepared whether it'll be a third or fourth wave, and this is going to be a part of life. And now this is going to get designed into your supply chain planning, be it infrastructure, be it your vehicles, be it the manufacturing and procurement. And in the early start of the pandemic, we ran few of the studies. What's likely to happen is couple of things in which we are seeing it. I mean, there were few trends. People will buy more because they will have the safety stocks will keep going up. They will produce more, they will store more. Now and as a human being, a lot of safety gets built into our planning, which is what we are seeing it, because I'm sure the people colleagues on the panel, they will be able to establish whether this trend, whatever we estimated, that their safety stocks have gone up or not, and which is going to lead every demand for the infrastructure, be it a warehousing or a transportation. uh, and even at the retail level, people would want to store more to make sure that their businesses are not impacted. So third wave or a fourth wave, this is going to be part of life, we believe. Yeah.
Uh, Gaurav, would you like to add something on this?
Sure. Thank you, Rahul. So, first of all, warm welcome to all my co-panelists and a lot of familiar faces again, and to the people attending. So just to quickly mention, I think largely well covered by Dr. Ravi and Mehul. One important thing from supply chain perspective is also to kind of make a fine balance in terms of how much you can prepare. So you may keep part quantities in terms of finished good, parts in terms of your raw materials, APIs, because you have to again balance between the expected demand and the inventory in hand. So you cannot block all your cash in terms of finished good when you think from supply chain perspective. So just to, if I take an example, remdesivir, now it's a good case study. So now expecting the third wave, how much should you keep in ready stock? How much should you keep in pipeline in your channels? And how much should you keep in terms of your APIs and raw material? Because it's not just about your cash getting blocked, but also about a life-saving drug. And if the third wave comes, as I am hearing, as I'm reading in a lot of places where it has come, so US, the third wave is stronger than the second wave, and that we already saw in India also, that the second wave peaks were much higher than the first wave peaks. So if the history or the trend is to continue, you may see higher peaks if the third wave comes. But there is also, as you said earlier, there is a counter point or a theory on that the vaccination drives have been significantly high. So your impact of needing those life-saving injectables or even cocktail drugs, etc., may not be that high demand. Cases maybe, as we are also currently seeing, cases are coming, but have started peaking also slightly, but they are with very normal rates. So I think it's a fine balance how you use technology, digital forecasting, predictive analytics to forecast and make that fine balance between your demand and non-moving inventory or not blocking your cash and inventory. So yeah, that's one.
So actually, that would take us to the next question. This whole 2 years would have taught us a lot of lessons and would have also opened up new opportunities, because typically we don't go searching for new opportunities until a disruption takes place, and then we learn and evolve to do things maybe even better than what we've done. So I would like to ask Mr. Kaushik, on this, that what are the lessons we have learned and what are the opportunities, especially with you being in the API. I'm sure you would have seen a lot of impact, and you would be sort of looking at how to evolve with the onslaught of the third wave expected.
Yes, Rahul. We see the impact in terms of the entire scenario getting changed. It's not only for planning for all the execution activities, the way the demand planning, supply planning, and inventory planning being done, and all the execution activities like warehousing, transportations, purchasing, export and import, the way we thinking, it changed. For example, the companies who are really dependent on China, I mean, have started really looking at the opportunities in India, how we really localize some of the aspects, given that the constraint in China, the lead times have really increased drastically, and it become much more uncertain now. Uh, for example, from here to US, which was 45 days, it becomes 75 days. Some of the consignment, so there is a lot of uncertainty involved as far as lead time to reach customers are. And as such, the customer requirement has changed. I mean, the expectation of the customers and the customer requirement has changed. So there is a lot of focus on demand planning, basically, to really understand what actually is the market requirement. It's going up, going down. It's bulk, or the customer want in a smaller lot also. So we observed those changes, and based on that, we changed our strategy internally, and we start using multimodal transportations. Uh, Instead of using just one transportations, we start working closely with the 4PL who is supporting us in terms of ensuring that the product reach to the customers, and we give the revised route times to the customers at how the situations are changing, which port there is a congestion, and we start measuring the OTIF in a way that how this pandemic is really impacting us and what are the mitigation plan. So most of the organizations and most of the supply chain functions have started reworking on the aspects to optimize the overall cash flow. And when we see cash flow, I think inventory become one of the key aspects, how to minimize, how to optimize the inventory, how to make sure that customer remain happy. So the entire decision on what to produce, how much to produce, become much more cautious decisions. It's much more SNOP based, much more filtered in terms of producing what actually is the customer required. In case of API, where the capacities are at the peak plant capacities, so the objective is to really make sure that we produce against customer requirement, or we produce the fast moving products for which there is no, risk of inventory. So as a strategy, we start contacting customers, and we start directly getting the demand from each and every customer, at least the top key customers, and then translating them to the entire supply chain, what to produce, how much to produce, and then making sure that we deliver to those customers. So, as an organization, we become much more cash flow oriented, and ensuring that how we make up with the changing need of the customer demands.
We also saw a lot of ups and downs. We were talking about remdesivir, and we saw, that at times when the demand was there, the supply was not there, and vice versa. Today, a lot of the pharma companies are sitting on stocks, and so there's been a lot of erratic and sporadic movement in such products. Mr. Vikram, what would you feel are the lessons learned in this, and any opportunities that you found which have come out of this challenge?
Sure. Thanks, Rahul. So before I begin, I would want to first say a very warm welcome to all the listeners and to all my co-panelists over here. To again see familiar faces, Gaurav, Dr. Mathur, Rahul, you. And thank you to RWS for putting this forum together. So yes, there are so many lessons that we as supply chain executives, professionals in the pharma space, which was one of the essential services during the entire pandemic. We have so many things that we have seen, I was hearing Mr. Kaushik talk about how planning has come to the fore, how demand sensing is now so critical. So I mean, the silver lining to all this is, of course, supply chain has grown beyond logistics and procurement only. Now people have understood that planning plays a very pivotal and kind of a central role in driving all these functions across the value chain of supply chain. So definitely, I would take that as a big takeaway for us, that people have realized that how important it is to plan better so that we can be ready for any scenario. So very quickly, I have four key learnings that I would want to share with all the listeners and viewers. Is I mean, we pre-pandemic also we were talking about being agile, being flexible, being fast to market. But the key takeaway for me is beyond being agile and fast. It's proactive crisis management. So it's more about business continuity now, rather than business re-engineering programs. I mean, not just looking at how I can re-engineer and quicken the processes that I currently have, but have a business continuity plan. Number two, the key takeaway that I would want to share with the listeners is supply chain visibility. So what is happening with your vendor and their vendors, both upstream and downstream, how I can get closer to the market, do a proper demand sensing. So these are the things that have become core to how I can grow as a business. So supply chain visibility is another key takeaway. Digitization is got a tremendous push, and when we talk about proactive supply chain management, and we talk about supply chain visibility, digitization is going to play a very important role. I'm not saying that it is only COVID that has triggered digitization, but it has definitely given it a very important and strong impetus to get into the next phase of digital transformation. We are already talking about industry 4.0, and I'm already starting to hear about industry 5.0 also. And the last key learning that I would want to share is scenario planning, building sustainable business models. That has become core to how we function as a group, as a function, and strive to improve our deliverables across the globe. So that's my quick takeaway, Rahul.
Thank you, Vikram. You spoke about digital transformation. We also recently heard that the government of India had or is looking to mandate barcoding for the domestic formulation business, which would then need us to look at technologies such as blockchain. And I would like Dr. Mathur to talk about digital transformation, how the pandemic has sort of pushed us towards the need to accelerate this, and how this would help transform the businesses in the future.
Yeah, thanks Rahul for that question. And for that, I'll just like to build on what Vikram has already said about scenario planning, and the ability to kind of run within your organization multiple what if simulations. Okay, now because we are living in a world that gets very frequently disrupted. Okay, and in the real world, what that actually translates is that your pricing contracts are more short term, your quantity contracts are more short term. I mean, if you just relate to the logistics industry, then you see earlier you could have year-long contracts in pricing in terms of air freight, or even ocean freight. Right now, this is far more dynamic. Prices are changing by week. Similarly, commitments on materials. You can't really bet on long-term commitments of availability of material. The prices are again also volatile over there. So with the short-term planning process, you have to re-engineer your entire planning cycles to make them more, to make them operate in shorter and shorter cycles. Number one. Number two, your disruptions are happening not only on the demand side, your disruptions are happening also on the supply side. So the traditional way of doing a demand and supply planning is that you run a demand forecast, and then based on your demand forecast, you create a response plan. Okay, basically an execution plan. normally variability around supply is not built in. Okay, it is assumed that capacity will be there. It is assumed that raw material will be there. And if it is not, those data points are actually taken up from actual purchase orders, actual EPDs committed by suppliers and all that. And then at a very tactical level, you see if the material is available and capacity is available, you will go around and create a production plan, right? But now, this uncertainty that is there on the demand side, a similar uncertainty is there on the supply side. So when you do your scenario planning, this has to kind of talk both ways. Okay. Now, in terms of digital, to what was your original question was, then that means in the organization, you will need to have that capability to have mapped all your supply chain digitally and able to iterate it, supported by technology, to run multiple scenarios with variations in both in capacity, raw material supply, and also on the demand. Okay, so these capabilities are getting built up. This is not the conventional supply chain plan, demand forecast and response strategy. This is a different way of thinking. This is, if I were to say, this is kind of creating a supply forecast, which is not the way we think right now. That is point number one. The other point is that which was being adopted in the automobile industry for the past many decades, which is having a line of sight or visibility about your extended supply chains. So you would have heard, if you go to a lot of these webinars or conferences where you get an understanding of how the automotive supply chain is structured, you will understand they have a visibility of not only the supplier, but your supplier and your supplier, right? All the way up to the 10th supplier. Some companies have that sophistication to do that. Now, because especially in the form of especially now in the case of pharma, the disruptions could happen at the level of excipients, it could happen at the level of API, it could happen at the level of key starting material. Pharma also needs to bring in that capability where you have line of sight of your extended supply chain as you go upstream. Okay, so what that means is that you need to have digital systems that capture that data, that capture those supplies, that capture those purchase orders. So we'll have to transform in a big way. We've started off, but I think pharma industry needs to catch up on mapping the entire supplier ecosystem the way other industries did it many, many years ago. That's my view on it. Great.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So in fact, we saw, so when the first wave hit, we came to a situation where even the CFAs did not even have printing stationery to print the invoices. That it went down to that level. And you mentioned about the air freight. There was a time when airlines were fighting for cargo, and when the pandemic hit, it was the other way around, where the cargo was fighting for space. So it was completely 180-degree turn. So yes, I guess it's very important to go into a deeper planning to look at vendors, which, as you rightly said, is the way forward. And I'm sure the pharma industry is evolving towards that with the learnings in this last 2 years. Aditi, would you like to take a quick poll?
Rahul, after the poll, I would also like to add a point to.
Yes, absolutely. So, Gaurav, over to you.
Yeah, I think what just to add to what Mr. Ravi mentioned a quick point. With the digital advancement and technology enablement, I think one very important change that we have seen, we are looking at more and more interconnectivity between the streams of supply chain also. So one, yes, with the partner. Second, if we have a lot of digital connectivity and automation, so a lot of transactional work, a lot of even your input work. So inputs in the terms of if else conditions, or what Dr. Ravi and Vikram both mentioned. Besides that, you can utilize your time for or the senior management's time for decision making, rather than a lot of calculations, a lot of analysis. So your tools are also, since they are interconnected, they are doing a lot of transactional work, automation. So it saves time for everyone. Second, it gives you a lot of now meaningful inferences. So earlier it was a lot of data. What to do with that data? How do you infer? It is to everyone's again understanding and ability. Now you also have tools which are giving you prescriptive analytics. So taking a step ahead further, and they are telling you that this product has been stock out in so and so situation. Now this situation tends to repeat with the all the flow of information and signals, be it on the demand side or on the supply side, and hence it tells you that please keep higher STN of this product, please keep higher buffer norms of these products. So it prescribes you, which is, even I would say, technology is becoming more and more provocative. So earlier it was an input, you want to take, you want to see, you want to analyze or not, up to you. Now they provoke you to take a lot of actions, which I think is really wonderful as the way technology is going, and a lot of your data is becoming even more meaningful. So we know data is there, trillions GB of data is generated. So how do you make sense for your particular range, assortment, SKUs is now also added by this digital enablement. Yeah.
Thanks. It was very insightful, Gaurav. Thank you. So one of the questions that comes out of this discussion is that, does this make the whole, supply chain more complex? Are there bigger challenges that come up? We are seeing so much of disruption, so many different ways of doing things that we used to do earlier. So to Dr. Mathur, would you like to say something on this?
So it's a both yes and a no, Rahul. So everybody has been talking about resilient supply chain. More than agile. What the pandemic needs us to do is to build in resilience into our supply chain. Now, what does that actually mean? If you were to look at strategies, what companies have adopted to build resilience over here is say dual sourcing, okay, of raw material. Some people had China plus one, which is another name for the same strategy. Nearshoring, okay, or intra-region sourcing of material and capacity. Now, when you try to build in a plan B into your supply chain, okay, obviously that will add to the complexity. Now, in the pharma world, that adds to more complexity, because then there are dimensions around regulatory approvals. There are dimensions around who owns the IP for the product, whether your contracts are loan licensing, or whether you are going in for a third-party manufacturing. So all these permutations and combinations about how the controls on the supply chain are designed, the complexity will be more. For example, I might have dual source. One of them could be in-house, another could be outsourced. Similarly for raw material, so every time I try to build any flexibility, I need to think about all these dimensions, also about how they affect the regulatory approval for the product. So yes, it adds to a little more complexity, because you have to plan accordingly. When you have choices, you also have to. It also adds to the complexity of planning in a particular way that optimizes again your inventory, optimizes your cash flow, optimizes your availability of inventory. So that's the way I look at it now.
Thank you, sir. Vikram, would you like to add something to this?
Absolutely. Thanks, Rahul, and a very interesting question. And I would definitely agree with what Dr. Mathur was saying. It is a catch-22, I mean, you want to bring resilience, sustainability into your supply chain. At the same time, it might increase your complexity. But I will be a little more, straight in, mentioning over here that, we need it. I mean, it's not anymore that we can negotiate with, or it will be a good to have feature, because the kind of disruptions that we are seeing in our supply chain, the kind of VUCA world that again Dr. Mathur was mentioning us some time ago, the kind of disruptions we are seeing in our supply chains, global supply chains, we need this kind of resilience built into our supply chain, and it need not always add to the complexity. Yes, of course, if we are looking at alternate sourcing or near shoring, or localization, as it is now very fondly called, deglobalization is something that we are hearing about. Globalization was probably pre-pandemic, and in the after disease world we are talking about deglobalization. So the deglobalization itself can reduce your complexity with respect to how you manage your inventories, how you plan your logistics and distribution. At the same point of time, it can increase a little bit of complexity in how do you do your vendor management, how do you do rate negotiation, how do you balance both vendors in your supply chain and keep them active in your supply chain. We all know pharma is heavily regulated, and building any alternate vendor is both complex, time consuming and costly. So as supply chain executives, we need to be sure how we need to proceed on any of these parameters. I'll take one more quick example of building resilience with respect to what Mr. Kaushik said in his opening remark with respect to how SNOP cycles are being run. So to reduce the complexity and to be more agile and to be more reacting to the market requirements, now the entire SNOP cycle, which ideally should be looking at a horizon of say about 2 to 3 months planning cycle, has been squeezed. I know during the pandemic we did something what we called a SNOE, sales and operation execution, which we squeeze the entire planning cycles to say about 2 to 3 weeks, where every week we are looking at what needs to be manufactured, what needs to be procured, and we were trying to squeeze down our planning cycles. So there I feel we were actually getting closer to both my demand and to my operations, giving them triggers as to what really needs to be manufactured so that we have better control on our inventory, and at the same point of time we are better in control to manage our resources. So in that view, I am seeing that the complexity was reducing. So it's a give and take, Rahul. There's no straightforward answer to this. But having said that, this is the way forward. If we need to be competitive, like I formally say now, better before we become bigger, we need to become better. And this is one step that we need to take to become better as supply chain, so that we are agile and we are sustainable in this VUCA world that we live in. Over to you, Rahul.
Thank you. In this, the infrastructure also plays a very important part, and since we've seen a lot of disruptions, I would like to take a view from Mehul. Since you have so much of warehousing activity going on, have you seen a lot of disruption during this period in terms of sudden spurt of demands or reduction in demand, and how would you have coped up with that?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with all the views from the Mr. Ravi, Gaurav, and Vikram. I mean, one aspect is about the way you look at your supply chain planning. I mean, from the vendor management to the end customers, and not to forget, what's happening at the customer side, also the way the dispensing is happening with the advent of Farm Easy, 1mg, NetMeds, etc. I mean, one thing we did see a demand for a temporary warehouses across wherever we have the parks. We had nothing, which was available as a ready to go. So one of the outcome across Asia, one of the studies says the warehousing demand as a speculative build. Most of the developer side also, they resisted building the speculative building where the inventory is available because of the higher capital investment and the drag with the investors, etc., which did not have. So that was one of the learnings as a developers. We saw that we need to have more speculative built out ready to be occupied. Now the other challenge is when you have the speculative building available, but for pharma it is very difficult to be having a compliant speculative building available for a pharma on a plug and play basis, which is one of the biggest question as a developer community. We need to answer that. But generally, the new age development, whatever we are building, is generally a pharma compliant with the insulation being the standard offering. So going forward, we see that is likely to play out whenever we have such kind of pandemic or such spurt in the demand. The important thing what we are seeing, traditional infra, if you look at whatever the warehousing infra where Rahul, you and I belong to, I mean, it was created from a simple B2B kind of a network modeling, where from manufacturer to the whole satellite warehouse, central warehouse, wholesaler and retailer. It was such a simple where what happens is you just generally replicate most of the warehousing infrastructure. Now with new age demand, where the models are going to be B2B, you have a B2C, you have B2B2C, where the demand is digitally being switched to the by Farm Easy, 1mg, NetMeds are the examples which will demand a higher velocity of throughput from the supply chain infrastructure. When I say supply chain infrastructure, which is even the transporter who's transporting from the manufacturing to the warehouse, to the wholesaler, to the retailer, or directly to the consumer. I mean, that also requires a whole designing and thinking, because most of the cities where you have a B2C demand are likely to be, probably coming out with the regulation to have the electronic scooters, electronic three-wheelers, etc. going forward. So that's another challenge we have. And how do you make sure that the infrastructure for a B2C is in the urban infrastructure fulfillment center? So one of the, I mean, we talk to a lot of the new age platforms where they're looking at creating a last mile distribution for the pharma. I mean, today most of the processes are run manually, whereas it requires ASRS, it requires a lot of automation, where infrastructure is required. Most of the activities happen on the floor. I mean, if you look at historically, all the companies like Dr. Reddy's and the other pharma players, you go back and check the infrastructure. Is it capable to handle all the different new age requirement of B2C, B2B, where the higher throughput is required from the same infrastructure and the redesigning? I think blockchain will be one of the most important factors. We believe that going forward, where warehouse and the transport infrastructure will play a very, very important role. If we are able to bring that as a part of, to make sure that it is visible, will be one of the most important thing. I mean, to certain extent, it has happened, because of the e-commerce driving the other sectors like mobiles, accessories, white goods, FMCG, or the groceries. We see that this transition has moved to a really superior infrastructure. The pharma, what I think Rahul, what you're trying to do in Mumbai will be the future from the infrastructure perspective. A lot requires, and working together with the manufacturer, even the last mile platforms is required as an integration, that what kind of infrastructure that is required for the new age pharma distribution.
I think the new age infrastructure, which is riding on the back of the impact of the pandemic and the need to follow the digital transformation and also get into a quality last mile, will definitely drive this demand. And I would just like Dr. Mathur's view on this infrastructure point, because I think you had a very short time to build on the Sputnik movement, because that was a -20 application, and you all have done a commendable job on that. So if you would like to just share some experience on that.
Yeah, Rahul, and you have complete line of sight on the Sputnik, the logistics. And what Mehul just recently, just mentioned about the throughput and velocity. So the entire vaccine distribution is that one area where, we were so much in, dire need of velocity. If you see the rate of vaccination that is going on in this country right now, we are clocking 1 crore vaccinations every day. So that is proof of the pudding, So there is velocity out there, right there for you. As consumers or as Indians, we feel, good, okay, those many vaccinations are happening in the country. But, put yourself in the shoes of a 3PL provider. The person who's handling, those 100,000, few 100,000 boxes every day, right? Or the transporter who's sending out those tens of thousands of temperature controlled vehicles every day. So that's throughput out there for you to see, right there. And like you said, getting ready for a -20 infrastructure, that was really very exciting for us. And we were waiting for approval, and then we had very little time to get the -20 warehouse up, and then the level of same compliance at the CFA layer and all the way to the hospitals and the clinics and now to the last mile, and every part of the had different solutioning that was required. Okay, for example, so we had huge warehouse, a central warehouse in Hyderabad, and then we had to design a packing solution that was compatible for transportation and then warehouse, secondary warehousing, and all the way. So a lot of thinking, a lot of planning, and then backed up by very quick execution. That is what the logistics team had to do, and that's what we did. And we are available in more than 80 cities right now, as far as Sputnik is concerned. Thank you for that.
No, exactly. That's what I was just trying to say, that you all have done a commendable job in a very short time. And happy to also, and already this is in the media, but I'm happy to say that, the first batch of the indigenously manufactured Sputnik is heading out very shortly to the market. And again, thanks to Dr. Reddy's to, make this happen in such a short time. And it's been an exciting journey, and happy to and proud to be associated with Dr. Reddy, sir, on this.
Just to add on to that infrastructure bit, I mean, just think about it, the efficacy. I mean, do you think that all of us really, we think that from the time it gets manufactured till the time it's dispensed at the government hospitals or wherever it is the product efficacy is been maintained? So when we say the quality infrastructure, it's part of that. I would say that, the transportation, storage, intermediate storage, and the final storage. Yeah.
Absolutely. And to add the technology to track and trace that. Because,
yeah, exactly.
And I mean, I've seen a lot of the vaccines. We've done almost all the vaccines that are there in the market today, right from Sputnik to Covishield, Covaxin, and I think now shortly the Zydus vaccine is coming in, so we're gearing up for that. But I'm sure Dr. Mathur would have a view on this, that at -20, when it moves from the government depots onwards down the line, what kind of gear up does the government have? I'm sure they would have been doing something, but there's a lot of limited information that is available on what happens in the secondary chain today. And I think that's where this whole digital transformation and technology will play a very important role in the future, because we will see many more such, not that we want to, but this is the way the world is. So you'll see a lot of new diseases and viruses, and then vaccines coming in, the need for temperature. You take a look at Pfizer, which is at -80, was having a struggle to come into India, and Moderna, which has been wanting to come into India for a while, is still struggling, I think, with the legal issues. And that's something that is at the end of the day slowing down the entire vaccination process, because we need a lot more vaccines to cover the entire population. And maybe if they're talking about a booster dose, then we've still got a very long way to go. So this is definitely a challenge. And I think all these discussions bring us to the most pertinent question. The impact on cost, the impact on lead time. We've seen a lot of disruption in the shipping industry. Probably one country or two countries have disrupted the entire way shipping works, not just the lead time, but we've seen sea freight go up 5-fold, 6-fold. During the lockdown, we've seen air freights go through ridiculously high prices. When aircrafts are not operating, there was very limited operations. So Vikram, would you like to have a view on the whole impact of this cost on logistics, and the impact of lead times? How has that disrupted, and how are we able to sort of go back to bringing things back to the way they were?
So, I mean, Rahul, I mean, this has been a very interesting fallout of the entire, last 18 months. I mean, the kind of disruption we are seeing in terms of how sea freight, rates have gone up. They've shot through the roof. How 3 or 4 major players across in the shipping fraternity, you know, have been in the center of this entire storm. So I mean, if I step back a little bit and understand, so last year when the entire air freight industry came to a grinding halt, I mean that was understandable. I mean, because as we know, I mean in pharma, I mean 60-70% of my freight goes on passenger air bellies. So once the pandemic struck and all the air freight, the passenger air freight was stopped, I mean, there was a immediate fallout with respect to, we not being able to ship our goods in air. And there was a slight increase also. I mean, with the increase also, there were no flights available. So, I mean, that was understandable. But what really happened since probably September, October last year, the way we start seeing the sea freight go up, I don't think so. As supply chain managers, as logistic managers, we were anticipating anything like this. I mean, for the first time in the history of the world, the Shanghai Freight Index has crossed, $4,000 for a TEU, I mean, which was in the range of $1,500, $2,000, I mean, so we are not just talking about 10-15% increase, we're talking about 100% increase. So there is something deeper that is, impacting this entire growth. So I have identified, 2 or 3 elements over here. So one is definitely the availability factor is impacting with respect to when we talk about availability, we are talking about both the reefer containers and the normal containers, because there is a lot of one-way, trade going on now, a lot of shipments going out from China to the West, because after the lockdown opened and the consumptions, were back on track. A lot of home-driven consumption was driving all the consumption of, containers from east to the west. So that was number one. I mean, relocating the containers became a challenge. To add fuel to fire was the fewer vessels that were sailing, and whichever was sailing, there were heavy port congestion, because even the ports were not working at 100% capacity. If the ports were working, we were not getting the drivers to move out the containers and bring them back. So these were the cascading effects that, finally led to the cost going through the roof, and now we hear the pundits and the experts say that this will remain the way it is till about Q1 2022, which I'm not surprised to hear, because this is the peak season for, shipments to the West and to the US, their holiday seasons, their Thanksgiving, the Christmas is coming around the corner, and a lot of shipments will move from China. So we'll continue to see the pressure, on our logistics and distribution with respect to how we are going to manage the shipments. So that's my take, Rahul. I mean, I'm something that we did not ever imagine that it could go to such an extent, but it again goes to show how interconnected and interdependent we are. I mean, if like they used to say, if China sneezes, the entire world catches a cold, and when you talk about pharma supply chain, it is even more complex, because China is one part of the supply chain, where a lot of actives and the intermediates are getting manufactured. And India being the pharmacy to the world, we also need access to all the logistics and distribution network available, so that we are able to distribute life-saving drugs to the entire global population, because we are in the business of making generic goods at a cost-effective way, in an affordable way. So if the sea freights are going so high, I don't think the third world countries, Africa, where my life-saving drugs, the antiretrovirals, the other critical medicines are going, they can sustain this kind of freight rate. So it's something that it troubles shippers like us. I mean, who have to deal with logistics service providers on this front. So it is a little troubling to understand how we can circumvent this issue. But at this point of time, we are kind of trying to make the best of what we have in hand, and trying to do some kind of negotiation and contracting with liners and the container service providers, so that our shipments are, at least for the critical medicines, are not disrupted.
True. We saw also a lot of disruption in the domestic logistics with diesel prices, fuel prices going through the roof. We've seen almost a 40% increase in fuel price. And with this China effect, and as you mentioned, China sneezes, I think they sneeze too hard this time. There were a lot of critical components for the auto industry also, which did not reach India, and that also disrupted production of not just passenger vehicles, but also commercial vehicles. And at the same time, we saw this, Euro 6 coming into India, which actually led to a sharp spike in the price of the asset. So, technically, if you look at, logistics, or if you look at a trucking company, we have seen an overall increase of almost 40 to 50% in all costs. And to add to that, because of the China effect, also the insulating material which is used for cold rooms and for the truck insulation panels, the insulation prices have gone up by 70 to 80% because there are just one or two manufacturers in the world, and with the China plant shutting down, everything went for a toss. And again, that leads us back to the original question that do we need to look at more sources for these kind of products also, because at the end of the day, they also impact the pharma supply chain, because cold chain is becoming necessary there. So
Yeah,
yes,
absolutely.
a big impact
Absolutely.
in the entire circle of inputs.
So, and since you mentioned, Rahul, about the automobile disruption, just to share a very interesting statistics with the listeners. I mean, in US, for the first time, the second-hand vehicle resale value was above the original sale value. This is because a lot of people were going back and buying the second-hand vehicles because there was
Yes.
no availability of the new vehicles.
New cars.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, so this is something like unprecedented. You cannot imagine this happening in a normal world. So probably this is the new normal we all have to live with.
No, so Vikram, the same thing has happened in India also. If you look at the commercial vehicles in the pre-Euro 4 era, those vehicles are fetching a much higher price, than what we would ever expect. So, I mean, that's also happened here, and I'm sure it's happening world over. So, yes, I guess this is how things are, and we have to work around and build a better output. Coming to the next question, we talk about risk mitigation in the pharma supply chain, and with API being a very important and hot topic in this whole disruption, I would request Rajeshji to say something on that. Sir, you're on mute.
Sorry. So from risk mitigation of pharma supply chain, I mean, there are 6 strategies basically we are focusing on, and all these six strategies are to address. One is service level. I mean, how we are servicing to the customers. What is our working capital or cash flow? And third is very clearly the cost, the overall cost management. And the first strategy is, I mean, in terms of creating the transparencies at multi-tier supply chain. That means upstream and downstream. So the focus is much more on creating the visibilities, transparencies with the vendors, customers, vendor also, so that make sure that what is their inventory level, how they are moving, what the demand coming, and providing them the clear signals upstream or whether it's a downstream. So that is one of the key strategies for us for more collaboration, making sure that we provide the informations. If there is a VMI from the vendor perspective, we run that VMI in an appropriate manner. And similarly, from the downstream perspective, the entire thing. So how much lead time is taking, what the lead times are increasing or reducing. So first was very clearly to create the transparencies. Second is to estimate, keep on estimating the inventory status in the entire supply chain, that how much is the inventory which you are carrying, which is impacting, whether it's a work in progress, raw material, finished goods, along the entire value chain. I mean, keep on really looking on this particular aspects of inventory. Then third is assess realistic forecast. I mean, our focus is to really look into the forecast item by item, SKU by SKU. The things are going up, going down. What are the constraints? How many customers we are adding? Why the customer demand is going down? And it's globally, basically, from each and every region's perspective, what is happening at different product portfolio level. Fourth is optimize production and distribution capacity. I mean, we are working on that. Whether we require the warehouse, we don't require the warehouse. So working on the entire capacities of the production part, as well as distribution part. And then when we say production part, that means whether outsourcing is required, not required, how much outsourcing is required. And the fifth is very clearly identify and secure logistic contracts or logistic capacities. Because very difficult at this point in time, even if everything is at the port, there is a blank ceiling which is happening. The vessel will not touch this particular port, and you would have given commitment to your customers. So we are on deep, really looking into those aspects of logistic, securing that capacities, giving forecast to the freight forwarder that we will move the consignment on this particular day, this particular week, so that we secure, we do advance booking with the freight forwarders. And the last is the managed cost and the entire net working capital, whether it's to do with the DPOs or it's to do with the inventory or the entire cash flow of the organization. So we are focusing on this six particular strategies, and I'm sure that most of the organizations are focusing on this six strategies to mitigate the risk. And it's not that this was not happening earlier. The acceleration of this implementation is happening very fast in a very short notice. Earlier people were reviewing on a monthly basis, but now, one would like to know on a weekly basis what actually happening around all these six parameters or six strategies.
Thank you, Raj. Gaurav, would you like to add something on this?
Thanks, Rahul. So I think as largely covered by Rajesh ji, I would just like to add a few points here. What we have been doing some of the same things, but slightly differently is in terms of, I think we were all doing it, as he rightly mentioned, and reviewing it on a monthly basis. But now the cycles have become shorter. So now we are reviewing it much more frequently, probably weekly or even bi-weekly, so that we do, as I think earlier also we spoke, that it's a VUCA world. It is very fast changing. It is not even giving you, I would say, a fortnight to change the scenario. So you are changing it probably weekly and bi-weekly. Secondly, your planning cycles are now becoming execution cycles, as even Vikram also earlier mentioned. And third and most important, now you can bifurcate. So a simple model that we all know, how you identify the risk, how you assess the risk, then what ways you can steer the risk. Some of these risks you can avoid, some of these risks you can delegate, some risk you can navigate through. And finally, after your solutions or your strategy, you then monitor these strategies or the execution, and then you give a closed loop or a feedback loop, whether it is working fine or you need some degrees of change to the strategy that you have adopted. So I would say very clearly, you need to enter the drawing board or the meeting room very frequently, continue to address these risks. Secondly, while some of these risks were there earlier and will continue to remain, so we bifurcated again: known risk, unknown risk. So your forecast accuracy will never be 100%. It's a known risk. So you stay put as you were doing. We were doing well. So even with, say, assuming you will have instead of 75-80% accuracy, your post-pandemic you will have a lot of volatility and hence a lower accuracy of your forecast of your demand patterns. And hence, how you tweak your backend, your entire supply system, your entire procurement system to again model to these demand risk, or your forecasting risk. Similarly, what are your known risk? You continue your strategy as you were doing. On your unknown risk, you have to build and deep dive more, where you need more lead indicators to track. So where you need stock to norms, buffer increase, increase of your vendors. So after this pandemic, as a learning, I think we all did more vendor engagements, and so it was for example, APIs. It was China plus one strategy, or outside India plus one strategy. Similarly, on the other packing materials also, we saw a lot of disruption when COVID wave 1, wave 2 were at the peaks. So we had a lot of disruption, and hence additional vendors that were there on board that really helped to kind of stream through this pandemic with agility. So I think that helped a lot of unforeseen, you see a lot of challenges, unknown risk. So how you navigate and proper strategy to build your stock to norms or buffers definitely gives you some time to think through and navigate through these. So that's a very important point.
Thanks, Gaurav. I think we've completed the questions. If anybody else would like to add any points as a closing remarks, it's open to all.
Yeah, Rahul. So, number one, thank you for conducting it so beautifully and anchoring the discussion in this panel. I mean, all the esteemed panelists have said all the right things and have highlighted the challenges and the possible solutions. One possible thing, that I'd just like to add to the discussion, and what we probably did not discuss so much in detail, though we might have referred to it, which is integrated business planning. So I think a couple of elements of planning that we also need to look at is long-term capacity planning. That is one. That is becoming more and more difficult. But we do need, because that requires a capex involvement. So long-term capacity planning, that also has to be looked at a different lens. New product launch planning, again, has to be done in a slightly different way. Probably that's a topic for another discussion altogether. And the third point is the way all these plannings integrate with the financial systems. So when you put all these three together, you are doing planning at an enterprise level, not just planning for the supply chain. Because supply chain is interfacing with your financial statements, to the financial statements. And long-term capacity, again, has its impact. So when you look at it in a holistic way at an organizational or enterprise level, then we come to the concept which is called integrated business planning. That is something also that has started, and I think we'll be talking more and more about it in the days to come. That were my remarks, Rahul.
Absolutely, sir. In fact, at ground level, we have experienced what you've said, that when pre-pandemic we had a situation where most clients would, from the cold chain trucking perspective, the orders would come on a daily basis. That these are the trucks we need today or tomorrow. And post June last year, it became a weekly planning. People would give weekly sort of indents. And a new phenomenon that has started recently, last month onwards, is we've seen clients giving 3 months projection. So I mean, this is something very new for us also, because it means that you've got to commit resources in advance to one particular client, and you don't know where the next spurt will come or where the downturn will come. But yes, so while you as a pharma user would want to get into this, but we as vendors would also then need to do a lot of backward integration with our vendors and our suppliers to sort of evolve to that level. And definitely, this is a learning from the experiences.
On the point of integration and long-term planning, when we were discussing vaccine infrastructure around 6-7 months back, a lot of 3PL providers say, why do I invest in a vaccine warehouse? Because the vaccine demand is going to go away in 1 year. I will not get the return on investments. So different industries, different challenges on creating long-term capacity and committing long-term funds in this kind of an environment.
Yeah, adding exactly, that is what I was just trying to say. When we plan our parks, it's very difficult to really have a pharma-ready warehouse infrastructure being built, because it requires a long-term commitment. It requires a lot of capital investment as well. I mean, so that remains a challenge when it comes to the infrastructure. I mean, how many vehicles Rahul will invest into, and what sort of vehicle Rahul will invest into for the purpose of managing the current spurt versus the long-term demand. That remains a big challenge.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that's why they say it's the new normal, because you're learning something new every day. And in a normal time we would be sitting on a on a stage and talking to people in face to face, and now we are doing this online. And but I think the whole concept of doing these VCs have you get better attention, you get more attendance, you get a lot more visibility than what you would do on a stage with a lot of noise and people moving around you. So yeah, I guess that's how things have changed. So I think it's been a great session, great learning. As Dr. Mathur had told me that I was very nervous because all of you are my seniors, so it's been I was just hoping that things would go well, but and I think all of you have taken this in the right direction. Thank you so much, and it's been a pleasure and honor doing this panel with all of you.
Thank you, Rahul. No, thank you.
Rahul.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Rahul, for steering the session so well. And I would like to thank all the speakers also for sharing your thoughts. And I'm sure today's takeaway will be very helpful for all of us. And we appreciate you being here. Now, I request everyone to join the exhibition where we have the best suppliers of the industry for you, and enjoy networking and have a good business. Read Exhibition India Warehousing Show. Thank you once again for joining us today. Have a good day and stay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.